Have you ever felt like your social media posts are just sort of shouting into a massive, indifferent void?
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
Right. Like you craft a thought, maybe you share an interesting article, and you hit send, the screen refreshes, and then absolute digital silence.
Yeah, crickets.
Exactly. No likes, no retweets, just no engagement whatsoever.
I mean, it is arguably the most common experience of the modern internet. We tend to operate under this assumption that if our follower count is negligible, our digital footprint is practically invisible.
Right.
We feel like, a single drop of water in just this impossibly vast ocean.
But what if that core assumption is just entirely wrong? Or, I guess to put a finer point on it, what if the authorities in your country decide that assumption is wrong?
That is a terrifying thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
I want you to imagine this scenario for a second. What if a simple retweet on a platform where you have like almost zero active followers led to a 20-month prison sentence?
I mean, it sounds like the inciting incident of some dystopian science fiction novel.
Yeah, totally.
But for the subject of our deep dive today, it was a very harsh, very documented reality.
It really was. So today, our mission is to explore this absolutely chilling intersection of complex network science, criminal law, and international human rights. We are diving into a custom stack of sources provided by you, our listener.
And this stack is fascinating.
That's incredible. It includes this collection of Chinese legal documents. We're talking indictments, official verdicts, an appeal, and a highly detailed, handwritten prison blood letter of defense.
Wow.
Yeah, and all of this surrounds the real-life case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan.
And, the structure of the source material you provided is particularly unique because it isn't just the raw legal documents.
Right, there's a whole other layer.
Exactly. It also includes multiple analytical evaluations of this specific case generated by a slate of various AI models. So we are looking at comprehensive structural analyses from ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini, Grok, and Quinn.
It's a heavy lineup.
It really is. It gives us this fascinating, multifaceted look at one single judicial event.
It does. But before we jump into the details of that event, we actually need to pause and issue a very important mandatory disclaimer to you, our listener.
Yes, absolutely crucial.
The source material we're discussing today contains highly politically charged content. It involves the Chinese government, its judicial system, and global political figures, prominently featuring Xi Jinping and Donald Trump.
Right, and we must be explicitly clear that we are taking absolutely no sides in this discussion.
None at all.
Neither left-wing nor right-wing. We are strictly and impartially reporting on the contents of the provided documents. We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints, political ideologies, or claims found in these texts.
Exactly. Our sole purpose today is just to convey the ideas, the mathematical defenses, and the legal analyses contained in that original source material you shared.
We are just the guides to the data.
Right. So let's set the stage by establishing the basic facts of the case outlined in the indictments. Dr. Chen Jinyuan is a PhD researcher whose specific academic expertise is in complex systems. According to the case files, he was at his home in Kunming when a large group of plainclothes police officers arrested him without presenting a warrant.
And the sources detail what happened next as a harrowing 24-hour interrogation process.
It's intense.
Very. This involved severe physical deprivation, specifically the denial of food, water, and bathroom access, alongside the forced extraction of his digital passwords.
And the charge that supposedly warranted this kind of aggressive raid is translated in the documents as picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Which is such a vague phrase.
Right. The AI analyses in our stack frequently categorize this within the Chinese legal system as a pocket crime. Essentially a catch-all, highly subjective offense used when specific laws don't quite fit.
Right, like a junk drawer charge.
Exactly. And the specific action that triggered this massive state response, retweeting political and social posts on Twitter by using a VPN to bypass the local firewall.
And he was utilizing a platform where the documents explicitly note he had fewer than 100 followers.
Less than 100.
Yeah. Furthermore, a structural analysis of his account showed most of those followers were inactive bot accounts, often referred to as zombies.
Okay, let's unpack this, because from the raw physical facts of this arrest and interrogation, the stack of sources moves into evaluating the legality and ethics of the situation. And interestingly, all the AI models viewed this case through one very specific lens, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR.
Yeah, they all gravitated right to it.
But before we get to the philosophy of human rights, we need to look at the actual evidence the police cited to justify the charge.
The list of evidence is largely comprised of cached, temporary images found on an old phone.
Right, they found a cartoon of the Umbrella Girl, which is a well-known symbol from the Hong Kong protests.
Yeah.
There was another satirical cartoon depicting Xi Jinping kneeling to Donald Trump, and a short video clip of Trump criticizing communism. But here's my pushback, though, and a question I'd ask anyone looking at this stack. If a sovereign country has its own specific, codified laws regarding public order and internet usage, why should we, or, why did these AI models evaluate this domestic case through the lens of a UN document written back in 1948?
It's a fair question, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, the consensus across the LLM analyses, from DeepSeek's structural logic to Gemini's ethical framing, is that the UDHR isn't just some piece of arbitrary Western legislation.
Okay.
It functions as a global ethical baseline. It is the foundational charter that establishes modern human civilization's moral minimum.
Ah, I see.
The AI models point out that even if a specific nation hasn't formally ratified every single subsequent treaty, the core principles of the UDHR are widely considered customary international law.
Oh, wow. So it's not really optional.
Exactly. It sets the absolute floor for how a state is permitted to treat a human being.
It's the ultimate benchmark. And the AI sources detail several highly specific violations of this baseline, starting with Article 19, which guarantees freedom of expression.
Right.
The local court argued that Dr. Chen was maliciously spreading rumors, but the AI evaluations entirely reject that framing, arguing that his retweets were actually acts of academic curation.
Yeah, the models emphasize that for a researcher, exploring diverse viewpoints, especially controversial, satirical, or, adversarial ones, is the fundamental engine of the pursuit of knowledge.
You have to look at everything.
You cannot study complex systems without observing the extremes of those systems. Sharing a political cartoon isn't rumor-mongering. It is exercising the fundamental right to seek, receive, and impart information across borders.
Categorizing that intellectual curiosity as picking quarrels feels like a deliberate misreading of academic intent.
Absolutely.
But the sources show the situation gets significantly darker once the actual trial begins.
Yeah, the AI analyses heavily highlight profound violations of Articles 10 and 11 of the UDHR, which are the articles guaranteeing a fair public trial and the presumption of innocence.
Right.
The documents state the trial was held in secret behind closed doors. And there is a genuinely shocking procedural detail captured in the transcripts.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
When Dr. Chen attempted to verbally defend himself using his scientific expertise regarding how networks operate, the presiding judge literally yelled at him, "Shut up, answer yes or no."
A judge screaming, "Shut up," at a defendant trying to present their case.
He was stripped entirely of his right to a fair, open trial and his basic right to mount a logical defense. I mean, imagine for a moment being in that courtroom.
I can't even.
Your freedom is on the line. You hold a PhD in the exact mathematical science that proves your innocence. And the person holding the gavel, the person holding your life in their hands, screams for you to shut up.
It obliterates your voice completely. It's not just a procedural error. It's a profound violation of dignity.
Which brings us to the very first article of the UDHR. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights.
Wow.
The AI models, particularly DeepSeek and Quen, highlight this courtroom moment as a violent silencing of his basic personhood. The state didn't just reject his argument, they refused to acknowledge his right to even make it.
It is a heavy, deeply philosophical argument about human rights, dignity, and ethics. But here is the crucial pivot in the source material.
Yeah.
Dr. Chen isn't a philosopher. He is a scientist. He studies complex network systems for a living. So how did a physicist defend himself against the legal charge that his retweets caused severe disorder to public order?
Well, he didn't rely on the philosophy of human rights. He used cold, hard math.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting. The defense documents he produced, including that prison blood letter, shift the entire framework from subjective legal theory to objective, verifiable hard science.
Completely changes the game.
Right, because to be legally convicted of this pocket crime, the statute requires concrete proof that the defendant's actions caused severe disorder. The prosecution's entire argument rested on the idea that his retweets triggered societal chaos.
Which is just wild.
Think about how absurd that is conceptually. Prosecuting Chen for causing public disorder with a retweet to a handful of inactive bot followers, it is literally like blaming a single pedestrian stepping off a curb in a quiet suburb for causing a massive citywide traffic jam downtown.
It doesn't just sound intuitively wrong physically, according to the laws of physics and networks. It is impossible.
Exactly.
And your pedestrian analogy captures the exact mathematical defense Chen laid out. He provided a rigorously structured proof of that impossibility, breaking down network science across 3 distinct scales. He started out at the micro level.
The level of the individual retweet itself.
Right. He applied a concept called the Galton-Watson branching process.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, to understand this, think about how epidemiologists track a virus using the R0 value. If a virus has a branching number of 2, one sick person infects 2 people who infect 4, who infect 8.
It explodes exponentially.
Exactly. If the branching number is exactly 1, the spread remains flat. But if the branching number is less than 1, say 0.5, the virus eventually hits a dead end and dies out completely.
Because it's not replacing itself fast enough to survive.
Exactly. And the same math applies to the spread of information on a social network. Chen mathematically proved that because he had fewer than 100 followers, and the vast majority were inactive zombie accounts that never engaged or retweeted, his average branching number was a tiny fraction of 1.
Meaning his information chain wasn't a viral outbreak, it was a single spark landing on a soaking wet blanket.
Right.
Mathematically, any information he shared was guaranteed to go completely extinct almost the instant he hit send.
The math proves it couldn't spread. Then, Chen zoomed out to the meso level, the structural architecture of the social network itself, using something called Cohen's critical threshold.
Oh, I saw this in the notes.
Yeah, social networks, much like the internet itself or the global airline system, are what scientists call scale-free networks.
Okay, so how does a scale-free network operate?
Think of major airport hubs. You have massive, hyper-connected hubs like Atlanta or Heathrow. If a blizzard shuts down Atlanta, the entire global travel network experiences severe disorder.
Sure, cascading delays.
Right. Those hubs represent super influencers with millions of followers. But a scale-free network also possesses a massive long tail of highly isolated nodes. Think of a tiny dirt runway in a remote rural town. If that dirt runway closes, the global airline network doesn't even register a blip.
And Chen mathematically demonstrated that his account was the dirt runway.
He was a long-tail edge node. Structurally, he was completely isolated from the main flow of information. Even if he wanted to, he simply did not possess the structural pipes required to flood the network and cause disorder.
He's the pedestrian on a dead-end dirt road miles away from the city highway. It is physically impossible for him to cause the traffic jam.
Exactly. And from there, he zoomed out one final time to the macro level, utilizing the theory of self-organized criticality to explain the true nature of systemic chaos.
This addresses the prosecution's claim of societal disorder, right?
Yes. What's fascinating here is how Chen brilliantly deconstructed the prosecution's reliance on the butterfly effect. The court vaguely assumed that a tiny flap of a butterfly's wings or, a single retweet can cause a massive hurricane of public disorder.
Right. The classic chaos theory trope.
But Chen used self-organized criticality to explain that the butterfly effect is highly conditional.
How so?
Let's use an analogy. Imagine you were building a sandcastle, slowly dripping wet sand into a taller and taller spire.
Okay.
Eventually, the spire becomes so incredibly steep and unstable that dropping just one more single grain of sand causes the entire structure to collapse in an avalanche. The prosecution tried to argue Chen was that final grain of sand.
But science says something different.
Self-organized criticality proves that the true cause of the avalanche isn't that final tiny grain of sand. The cause is the built-up systemic instability of the sandcastle itself. The avalanche is the inevitable result of the system's own internal tension reaching a breaking point. A massive social disorder only happens if the society is already in a supercritical, highly unstable state.
So if a society actually descends into chaos, it's because the systemic pressure cooker was already primed to explode, not because an isolated researcher with 50 inactive followers hit retweet.
Exactly. Chen weaponized network science to prove that his isolated corner of the internet absolutely was not in a supercritical state. He systematically dismantled the charges from the micro, meso, and macro levels.
That's brilliant.
He didn't just argue I didn't do it. He submitted mathematical proof that he physically could not have done it.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if the hard math definitively proves his retweets couldn't possibly cause a ripple, let alone chaos, and the prosecution provided absolutely zero physical evidence of any actual societal disruption occurring in the real world, How on earth did the court justify handing down a 20-month prison sentence?
The answer lies in the official verdict document, and the internal logic the judge used is profoundly confounding.
The sources highlight this incredibly paradoxical leap of logic. The court ultimately ruled that because Dr. Chen possesses a high education and knowledge level, he should have inherently known the information contained in the political cartoons and videos was false.
Yeah.
They argued his education proved he was knowingly and maliciously spreading rumors.
They literally weaponized his PhD, using his academic background as evidence of his malicious intent.
But I have to push back hard on the judge's premise here. Doesn't the entire process of attaining a higher education teach you the exact opposite?
Absolutely.
The PhD doesn't give you a magical encyclopedia of absolute truths. It teaches you to be a skeptic. It teaches you to constantly question sources, to analyze conflicting data, to fundamentally wonder if absolute truth even exists when dealing with highly complex geopolitical situations.
Right.
How can a court claim that being highly educated proves you possess an omniscient ability to identify a lie?
You hit the nail on the head, and that exact paradox is what several of the AI models latched onto in their analysis. To tear apart the judge's logic, the sources explicitly bring in two massive philosophical concepts: Karl Popper's theory of falsifiability and Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
Okay, let's take the time to break those down for the listener, starting with Popper.
Sure. So Karl Popper revolutionized how we understand the scientific method. Before Popper, many believed science was about observing the world to prove your theories true. If you see 1,000 white swans, you claim you've proven the absolute truth that all swans are white.
Makes sense intuitively.
But Popper flipped this entirely. He argued that you can never absolutely prove a theory true because the very next swan you see might be black.
So science isn't about proving things true, it's about trying to prove things false.
Falsifiability. A true scientist proposes a theory and then rigorously tests it against reality to see if it breaks. Therefore, the entire foundation of advanced academic inquiry relies on the understanding that human knowledge is limited, subjective, and constantly evolving.
Applying that to Dr. Chen, a true scholar looks at a highly controversial political cartoon or a fiery speech and says, let's examine this artifact, let's explore this perspective, rather than instantly declaring, I know for an absolute binary fact this is a malicious lie.
Exactly. And that leads right into Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which takes this skepticism to the mathematical level. In the 1930s, Kurt Gödel mathematically proved that in any complex axiomatic logical system, even one as pure as mathematics, there will always be statements that are objectively true, but entirely unprovable within that system.
Meaning that a perfect, complete, and perfectly consistent system of absolute truth is mathematically impossible.
Yes. If the universe's purest language, math, cannot lay claim to absolute binary truth in every scenario, how can a local judge demand that a human researcher possess an omniscient grasp of absolute truth regarding a satirical cartoon?
It's an impossible standard.
The AI sources highlight this as the core tragedy of the entire case. The court didn't just misunderstand network science, they essentially criminalized the foundational act of academic inquiry itself.
Wow.
By legally ruling that a highly educated person must automatically know the absolute truth of any piece of internet content, they equated the intellectual act of exploring multiple perspectives with the criminal act of maliciously spreading rumors.
They turned the pursuit of knowledge, the very act of testing a hypothesis, into concrete proof of guilt.
This raises an important question. What happens to the intellectual health and progress of a society when its legal system treats curiosity, skepticism, and the gathering of diverse viewpoints as literal evidence of criminal intent?
Everything just stops.
Right. If exploring an idea is legally treated the same as aggressively endorsing a lie, you paralyze the fundamental mechanism of human progress.
It's a terrifying precedent that creates an incredible chilling effect on anyone who wants to learn or explore. So let's synthesize this deep dive for you, our listener, because we have traveled through some profound territory today. We started with the raw facts of a man getting arrested for a retweet on a VPN, but the sources revealed this was much more than a breakdown of a foreign legal case.
It revealed a violent collision between two fundamentally incompatible ways of viewing reality.
On one side, you have the rigid, absolute, almost archaic language of a judicial system that demands binary answers. A system that screams, shut up, answer yes or no. A system that believes truth is a simple toggle switch between pure fact and malicious rumor. And that rigid system collided head-on with the nuanced, probabilistic, highly complex reality of modern network science and human intellectual curiosity.
A reality where truth is something to be endlessly explored and falsified, never dictated by a gavel. A reality where a person's actual influence on society is measured by mathematical network architecture, not simply assumed by an authority figure's paranoia.
And why does this incredibly deep dive into one specific case matter to you? Because in an era where we all live a massive portion of our lives online, understanding the actual mechanics of our digital footprint is vital.
Very true.
We naturally tend to suffer from a bit of main character syndrome. We think everything we post is monumental. But understanding how networks actually function structurally, and far more importantly, understanding how authorities who don't understand those networks might aggressively misinterpret our actions is crucial for anyone who values free thought and digital expression.
The gap between what our digital actions physically accomplish in the real world and what an uneducated authority claims they accomplish is a very dangerous space for a citizen to operate in.
Which brings me to a final, somewhat provocative thought I want to leave you with, building on the incredible sources you provided. We spent a lot of time talking about Dr. Chen's brilliant defense.
Yeah, the math.
He used the Galton-Watson process and Cohen's threshold to definitively prove that as an edge node, he was mathematically isolated. His branching number was less than 1. He had absolutely zero structural impact on the global system.
The hard science saved his logical argument by proving his total powerlessness in that network.
But what does that scientific reality mean for our own sense of digital agency?
Oh, that's heavy.
We spend so much time and energy fighting for the right to speak online, fighting against censorship, demanding that our voices be heard on these platforms. But if the cold, hard, verifiable math of network science dictates that for the vast majority of us, the billions of edge nodes, no one is actually listening, and our information chains die instantly, is our digital freedom ultimately just an illusion?
Wow.
Are we exhausting ourselves fighting for the right to shout into a void that structurally cannot even hear us?
It is a chilling existential thought to end on. It forces us to ask if the philosophical freedom to speak truly matters if we lack the mathematical capacity to be heard.
Something heavy to mull over the next time you hit send and wait for the screen to refresh. Thank you so much for bringing such an incredibly challenging, multi-layered stack of sources to the table for this custom deep dive. It has been a wild ride through law, math, and philosophy. Keep questioning everything, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next one.